Take a moment and dive in with us. This is the Ocean Ideas Podcast, brought to you by Ocean Lovers Festival. Today, we're talking about the ocean's oxygen crisis, how everyday actions like fertilizing crops or even flushing toilets are sending nitrogen into the sea, fueling algal blooms, creating dead zones, and draining the ocean of oxygen. But there's hope. Join us in listening to scientist Dr. Pia Winberg as she tells us more.
Thanks everyone for listening to what sounds like a scary title, the Ocean's Oxygen Crisis. And it sounds a bit alarmist and extreme, and I want to emphasize that it is pretty alarmist and extreme, but that we have solutions if we all start to recognize and learn them. So at the end of my very short talk, I really just want to get a new concept across to you all, and that is that we have overshot the fertilization of the oceans, and that, in a simple story, is leading to deoxygenation of the oceans. I just want to paint a simple picture of how that works, because when you spread this story and have to explain it to people, it's not something that's in the common sphere of knowledge. We all know about climate change, we all know about plastic pollution. They're simple, tangible stories. But these are just some of the consequences of what we have done to the planet, and we now categorize those impacts as 9 types of impact, 9 planetary boundaries that we have breached, and carbon dioxide and global warming is just one of those. But the leader of the pack was us pouring all this nitrogen into the coastal zone. Every time we flush the toilet in the morning, some nitrogen's going out to sea. Every time we fertilise sugarcane fields in Queensland, there's nitrogen flowing out to the Barrier Reef. Every time we water our rose gardens with some fertilisers, that all ends up in the coastline. And we've actually doubled that nitrogen fertilisation of coastal zones all around the world, doubled it. And the ocean actually can't absorb that much nitrogen. And so what happens? It grows algal blooms that we don't want. We create all this biomass that the oceans can't absorb. It sinks, it starts to rot, and that rotting sucks oxygen. And so the nitrogen elevation is leading to oxygen depression at such a scale that we now estimate 2% of the oceans are deoxygenated. There's 500 dead zones around the world. If you want to go diving in the Gulf of Mexico, don't bother going below a metre because there's nothing there. There is no oxygen. And there's many zones like this around the world, increasing at a rate. We've gone 400 times the number of deoxygenated zones since the 1960s. And we anticipate that by 2050, 10% of the oceans will be deoxygenated. So you've all heard about how seaweeds and algae are creating a whole lot of the oxygen that we breathe in today, and they do. But if we're creating so much biomass that the ocean systems can't handle it, we start to end up with a deoxygenation scenario. And it's even sneaking into the atmosphere. So if we keep going at this rate, and this sounds really extreme, like she's tripping on something, in 3,000 years, there won't be enough oxygen in the atmosphere for us to breathe. That means human race is going to disappear without oxygen in 3,000 years. And it seems like a long time, but it isn't that long to imagine 3,000 years. And so the way to turn this around is that we start to decrease the amount of nitrogen going into the coastal zone, and that will start to increase the amount of oxygen returning. And how do we do that? By having the right balance of photosynthesis. And we now need to accelerate photosynthesis beyond what the coastal zones can tackle. And that's what we do. That's my personal agenda. Behind producing foods like this, which catch nitrogen at the coastline and turn it into protein, they actually protect the coastal zone from this load and allow the coastal zone to keep breathing nice amounts of oxygen and be in a balanced system. And our seaweed pools pump out masses of oxygen. So if you're standing over one of our seaweed pools and breathing in, you're actually getting 150% saturated oxygen fumes. And so we really need to start turning this around by just being aware of it. We're all talking about climate change and global warming, and it's like we've got to cool the planet. if we just start doing things like blocking the sun and cooling the planet, we haven't addressed the core issue, and that is this misbalance in nitrogen, oxygen, land use for food production, and all these other complicated factors. So we've got to start working with the system, and that means stopping the nitrogen at the border, putting it back into the food system, and allowing oxygen to start flourishing again in the ocean coastal zones. So that, in a nutshell, is my key message today. I could go on and on about all the planetary boundaries and the complexity of biogeochemical cycles, but I do think it's really important that as part of us being here today and loving the oceans and stopping the plastic and addressing climate change and issues like that, but that we actually become aware of the number of critical issues that we have to address around the oceans and the things that we can't see. Because indeed we can't see that the nitrogen is hitting the coastline. We know it's invisible. It's like an invisible sandstorm hitting the coastal zone, and we just aren't aware of it. Which is not surprising, because how many people here are reading all the scientific papers about biogeochemical cycles? And we need to spread the word that there are things we can do to start rebalancing. So that's my message, is start eating seaweeds and things at the coastal zone that are taking back the nitrogen, regenerating nitrogen into the food chain without pouring more fertiliser onto everything. It's the essence of regeneration in our food system. And we will end up having a reoxygenated planet, depressing nitrogen, reducing land use for food production, reducing freshwater use for food production. So please go home and have a little bit of seaweed in your diets today. Are there any questions?
Thanks for that. I wasn't actually aware of that, so I learned something new today. Just a question on seaweed, and it's maybe my ignorance. A lot of the seaweed that you buy seems to be wrapped up in a lot of plastic. Mm-hmm. Can you recommend sources that aren't so heavily mass-produced?
Yeah, so seaweed has joined the whole food chain, and what's available to package things is plastic. And we actually, through our company, in selling seaweed products, have to fight and work with companies all the time on please put our products, give us biodegradable products, packaging to put our seaweed into. And so it's a very hard and difficult frontier. But there are now, so we have supplements that we put into home compostable sachets with Ziplocs. But you know what? We tried to order those again last week for our next level of stock replenishment, and they've run out in Australia and they can't get them back in. And that's good news, right? Because they are actually now becoming in such demand that the industry is finding it hard to keep up. Seaweed will be a part of creating plastics and compostable plastics in the future, but not immediately, because we can't compete with all of the copious amounts of cheap plant waste that already exists. You can use all the plant waste and pallets and things that already exist in packaging. And so one day seaweed will join them, but there's not enough seaweed being used yet to make that a possibility. But we can buy biocompostable bags, keep demanding it, and even if it runs out in the stores, that's the only way we're going to get to a no plastic solution. And work with companies that drive a no plastic packaging policy.
And if you say that this happens because of us flushing our toilets, what else can we do?
Yeah, so I'm not saying don't flush your toilet, but what we need to be aware of is that there are even local councils and government areas now that use reticulated sewage schemes. So in the Shoalhaven, for example, where I live, the Shoalhaven City Council has a reticulated effluent management scheme, the REM scheme. So they take the sewage treatment water and they digest it and they turn it back into the dissolved nitrates, phosphates, and then they use it to spray sports fields and things like that. Through the water gets used in that way. And that's then preventing it hitting the coastline. And so in part, you keep flushing your toilet for now, unless you can live with a compostable toilet system and deal with them that way. But in Sydney you can't. But really, when you're at elections and councils, start to be aware that sewage management is a massive environmental service, health service today. The development of sewage treatment schemes has really been about human health and hygiene. Here at Bondi decades ago, we used to flush the problem out to sea. Now we're no longer doing that, but we still flush the nitrogen out to sea. And so we need to start telling councils and sewage treatment plants, this is a resource that we burn all these fossil fuels to catch from the atmosphere in the Northern Hemisphere. So this is where you'd be aware of the system and vote for council government solutions that we recover the sewage treatment schemes. Thank you, everyone. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to the Ocean Ideas podcast. If you found this episode eye-opening, follow and share to spread the word, because awareness is the first step to action. And don't miss the Ocean Lovers Festival 2026 program launching soon. Join us in March to celebrate ideas, art, music, and action, and discover real solutions for our blue planet.